Hello YouTube and welcome to the channel. Now then, today's video is kindly sponsored by WPL. They have sent me a C44KM kit to build for you guys, so that's precisely what we're going to be doing today. If you're new to this or you're not familiar with WPL products, the KM is the kit metal version. It's basically the standard version plus a load of trick metal upgrades, and personally speaking, if you're going to buy a kit off WPL, I would strongly suggest you buy the KM because it only costs a few quid more and the value of the metal parts far exceeds this if you bought them individually. So like I say, if you're thinking about getting a kit off WPL, get the KM version, save yourself some money in the long run. Once again, thank you to WPL for sponsoring today's video, and a massive thank you to you guys out there for supporting the channel. All the products that I'm going to be using today will have affiliate links in the description below, so if you want any of them, just click on the link and you can go and have a peruse of WPL's official store. I'm going to split this video into two parts. The first part is going to be the chassis, axles and running gear, and then the second video is going to be the bodywork, the electronics, and hopefully take it for a run outside. So without further ado, I think we'll make a start. I'm going to build the axles first, but I'm going to shut up waffling and get on with the build. Now, because this is the kit metal version, as the name would imply, we get alloy axles as opposed to the plastic ones, and these come with full set of bearings, metal gears, metal drive cups, metal hexes, metal everything basically. Now, I've had experience with building these in the past and they can be quite tricky to get to run smooth. Now recently WPL have started to include these little paper gaskets in the kits, and these are basically there to give you the correct spacing for these covers, and it allows you to adjust the mesh between these gears. So hopefully a few of these little paper gaskets and we'll be able to make these axles run super smooth. One tip I do have for assembling these axles is to leave all the grub screws loose until final assembly. That way you can adjust the relative position of the central gear and these little universal shafts here. It just makes it easier when you're trying to get the axles to run smooth. So I've put the shaft on with the bearings, I've put the bearings in the little bell housing here, and now I'm going to try out these little gaskets and see if I can't see how many of them I need, or if I need any at all, when I put the bell housing on to get the gear mesh correct. So I've had a little bit of a play around with it, and I found out that I can get away with just two of the little paper gaskets on this bell housing, and this gives me the correct gear mesh and makes the whole axle run super smooth. So I'm happy with that. So we've finalised the positions with a bit of Loctite on these three grub screws. I'm going to go ahead now and put the red case on, and then we're going to move to put on the steering hubs. So there's the front axle complete. There's a little brass bush and screw that fits in there. It goes between the axle housing itself and the steering hubs. There, they rotate nice and smooth. The gears are still the correct mesh. They rotate nice and smooth. So what we'll do now is basically move on to the rear. Because the construction of the rear axle is so similar to the front, I'm not going to bother you with its assembly on the video because it's basically the same. I will share this little tip with you though, if you didn't already know. Sometimes you'll still get little tight spots. I mean, these, I must admit, when I assembled these are pretty good. But if you've still got a little bit of a tight spot, if you've got a drill, if you put the hex end, the wheel end I should say, or the hex end into the chuck of the drill, you can use the drill to spin the axles up, and this, I think this has the effect of bedding all the componentry in, so they end up being silky smooth. I mean, this one, the rear one particularly so. But there's a little tip for you if you weren't already aware of it. If you've still got a little bit of roughness, you might be able to use a drill to spin your axles up and get rid of it. Next we move on to the shock absorbers. These are super easy to put together. There's only literally 5 bits. The eyelet, what would be I suppose the damper rod, there's a spring inside, the shock body itself, and this little cap. When you're assembling the eyelet onto the damper rod, because they've got like a little Phillips head on the damper rod, you can hold it secure using a screwdriver and just twist on the eyelet on the end. So I shall go ahead and construct the remaining 3 of these, and then we'll move on to making the chassis and the axle tie rods. So I've gone ahead and made up all the link rods, the dimensions and lengths for which are included in the instructions, and it's well worth spending a little bit of time to make sure you get them all the correct length, because that will save you misaligned suspension when you assemble it. Don't forget there's a much shorter one for the panhard linkage, so just beware that when you're making it up, make sure you get that one correct as well. I've gone ahead and added the brace to the top of the axles. On the front one, when you tighten the screws up, it can pinch the axle halves up, so your steering can go a bit stiff, but if you give it a good wiggle around for a bit, it soon frees it off. Now don't forget, on the metal axles you've actually got this little dual nut stroke bracket, and that fits on the end of these pins here that secures the axle brace to the two halves of the axle. So if you're wondering what that was for, that literally goes on there and you screw those pins up and that clamps it on to the axle. Now our next job is to start assembling the chassis. We'll need the chassis rails for this and several plastic parts like the servo board and the rear brace. We'll also need these little brass ball joints, and these in effect connect the axles and the chassis together via the tie rods. So I'll go ahead and make a start assembling the chassis. Well, that's the basic chassis put together. I haven't put the servo or the 2-speed motor in yet because I'm going to set them up separately and install them last, if you like, which is okay because the 2-speed just slides neatly between the two frame rails. There's no actual little bosses on the 2-speed, so it literally just drops straight in. I've also gone ahead and finished the axles off. I've put all the little brass ball joints on where they should be and popped the tie rods on here and there. Steering linkage is on as well. The only trouble I did have, while I'm thinking about it, is fitting this little brass ball joint here to the bottom of the servo board. It was an absolute pig to get in, and I ended up having to super glue it because I stripped all the plastic trying to screw it in. So that's the only problem I've had so far. So what I'll do, actually, while I've got you, if you like, I'll actually install the rear axle to see if it's something like. Now these are just, you have to pop the tie rods on and they just literally snap into place like that, if you can hear that. There we go. Put the suspension arms on. Now, have I made a mistake there? Yes, I think. I thought, because of the longer, I thought the C44 had a longer wheelbase, so I thought the suspension strut fitted there, but it doesn't, does it? It does according to the instructions. Right, I'll get back to you. Right, I know what I've done wrong. I've actually mixed up the lengths of the axle tie rods up between front and rear. So now that looks a lot better already. It should be something like, if we pop that on, like I say, they all just pop onto the little brass ball joints. I have to put some force into some of them, mind. But there we go. So that's looking something like, we've now got some suspension and axles on. So I shall repeat the process with the front and I'll get back to you. Right, we've now got a functioning chassis. I did make a couple of daft errors while I was assembling it. One was I've had to flip the rear axle over because the axles were rotating in opposite directions. So when I put the motor on, the wheels would have gone in opposite directions. But it's a good job I spotted it now rather than later on down the road. And the second was I used too long of a screw in the top of this shock body here, and it actually fouled the spring inside, so I lost a bit of travel. Anyway, there are two fairly straightforward issues to put right, so it's no biggie. Next job, I think, is we assemble the wheels with the wheel weights, put those on, and I'm going to assemble the drive shafts. And one thing I have noticed about the chassis at the moment, this kit metal chassis, is how much weight we've actually got low down now, but even before I've put the wheel weights on. So hopefully that will pay dividends with its crawling potential. Now then, fitting the weights to the wheel rims I find can be quite tricky. So I'll share with you my technique. It might not be the right one, I don't know. But what I do is, with the two halves of the weight off the rim, I attach one side. You can sort of sprag the two halves of the connected wheel weight open, slide the wheel rim in, and then connect the other side. And I find that makes the job a little bit easier. So what I normally do then is blob a little bit of glue to stick the weight to the rim so it doesn't rattle around, and then once that's done we glue the tyre on. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead, complete all the wheels, and we'll move on to the drive shafts. All the wheels are on, so we've now got ourselves a rolling chassis. You do really notice the extra weight at this point that those weighted wheels provide. It should hopefully give us a really low centre of gravity, which should make it excellent off-road. Next up, I think we're going to make the drive shafts. So I'll get the little bits and pieces out of the bag, and we'll make a start. If you're at all familiar with the C44, you'll know that the wheelbase is longer because the rear axle sits a little bit further back in the chassis. Now correspondingly, that means that we've got a much longer drive shaft that goes to the rear. So you've just got to bear that in mind when you're assembling the kit, that the longer shaft is obviously for the rear axle. Now these drive shafts have a lot of small fiddly parts and they can be quite tricky to put together. But I'll show you how I do it, and it might just help somebody out there. If you just push the little metal barrel, if you like, through the eyelet in the end of the drive shaft, make sure the hole in the centre of it is pointing vertically up. Now you get your end piece, and the hole, make sure the hole is sort of aligns roughly with the hole in the little barrel. You get your pin, poke it through. You might have to give it a little bit of a wiggle. There we go. So give it a wiggle till it comes through the other side of the drive shaft. Like I say, this can be quite tricky. And sometimes you get a bit of swarf or something in the other end, so it doesn't go through properly, like this one isn't now. Ah, there we go. Now, so the pin doesn't drop out, I always usually put a bit of tension on the end with my fingers, and if we get the retaining spring, slip it over there, get your nails in between the coils and just pull it down, and there we go, it's on. So I'll repeat the process with that one and then we should be done. Okay then, I think we'll leave it there as we've got a rolling chassis together. Don't forget to tune into the next video where we put the motor in and the electronics and we fit the body, and hopefully, fingers crossed, take it out for a run. Massive thank you to WPL for supplying the kit for today's build. The affiliate link to which will be in the description below. If you want to do the channel a massive favour, give one of those links a click and go and visit the official store. As ever, if you found the video of some use and interest, please give it a big thumbs up. And we're very close to 1,000 subscribers now, chaps, so if you could hit that subscribe button, push us over that 1,000 subscriber mark, that would be absolutely fantastic. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.